Hey, we're back again. Miss me? I miss me too. Actually, that's actually more of a true statement than ever. I have missed me, the real that has the one that started my life, the young me, the bright me, the challenge me, the excited me, the awe inspiring me, the open minded, everything is possible me. I have missed that me for a long time. The problem was I didn't realize I missed him because I didn't know where he went. It's like, here's the problem. We all grow up and we go through life and change as we get older. We're kids. We see the adults doing all these things. Go, hey, I wish you could do these things. The parents say, oh, you can do those things when you're older. So fine, you go, okay, I'll wait till I'm older. Once I get older, then I can get to do all the things that the adults do. And what are those things out to? Typically, if depending on how so, some people have an adult that smokes, so we see smoking as a cool thing. We think my dad smokes, my mom smokes. It's a thing that happened. I mean, later on over time, you get peer pressure. You want to curious about it, you want to try it out, like other things. Some people, it's drugs. Maybe not as much more for most people, but for some people, it's drugs. Soda pop, for example. I mean, we're told drink and have all these healthy foods. Well, turns out some of those healthy foods are not really healthy at all. We find out that later too. That's another line, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm just talking about growing up. Okay, we see these things through life, and we go through the stage. We're born, we start to grow. Our parents goo gaga us. If we're an only child, they goo gaga us the whole time because we have nothing else to until we become no longer exciting to them and no longer new. But a lot of times, most of us have siblings, and we grow up and we have a sibling come along, and longer, we're not longer the star of the show anymore once our sibling comes along, and it goes so for each of the things until we get to the final one. Whoever happens to be a final one, if you're an only child, you're the beginning and the end of everything for your parents, or parent in some cases, unfortunately. So you grow up, and you go through the cycle. You start young, and you go to a child where you're walking and you're growing and you're laughing and playing and learning and then watching all the things go by and watching mommy and daddy and all this stuff going about. And then you become a teenager. Now you're starting to feel this need for autonomy. You feel now I'm on the cusp of getting what I've been told by my parents only they could have. But we don't wait. We don't want to wait. We never want to wait. We're always impatient. We always want to try new things because we wonder we want to find what's so great about that new thing. So we get to the new thing. So a lot of kids end up like statistics like smoking and drinking and all the so-called adult functions, the adult activities that we are told are part of the adult ritual of being adults. And not children. We can't do them. And of course, the other one, of course, is obviously in a lot of cases sex. We don't know what the big deal about that is. Obviously, sex must be important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We were the result of somebody having sex, and sometimes in this case our parents. So of course that became a very important thing, and for them, and obviously for our existence. And so we go through this thing, and then we go to become. Once we finally get to the plateau, we finally have gone experimenting overtly through grabbing mommy's cigarettes, stealing mommy and daddy alcohol, inadvertently finding an older person to buy these things for us, so we can sort of sneak off clandestine and go, we're doing all these adult things. We're so grown up. Then we do grow up, unfortunately. We leave school and find that no longer our parents are taking care of us. The comfort and safety of childhood is no longer there for us. We're now been forced because we were told that all this time, this whole activity where we were laughing and playing and growing, that was the preparation for a time we would be adults. And one of the things that come out that we didn't really understand, we never saw our parents doing it, so we didn't understand the consequences of it, was going to actual work, or in some cases maybe starting a business for some people, because some people maybe their aspirations and their abilities and their opportunities might be more available of that. Most of us end up going to work for somebody, and this is where the usual divide in terms of our understanding of being adults really comes down to. Some of us get to choose to work for something or do something they want to do that they love. Not many of us do. Many of us just work for the sake of kids that eventually come on through the accidents of our own indiscretions of when we go with sex. That's one sort of consequence that we didn't really take into account when we did these things, thinking that was such a great thing. We didn't understand there was ways we could have prevented that, and of course some of us have gotten the education to do so and some of us not. And even so, some of us thought maybe, oh well, it'll never happen to me. It happens to everybody eventually. So then we get this thing. We have so some of us end up going to work because we have obligations now. We have family now. We've now formed a family bond with somebody. We actually found someone, had kids with them, and now we have to go and take care of them. So we go to work, and we work and work and work and work, and we indulge in all these adult indulgences that now we are told we are the very passage of now we're adults. We can now engage in all these indulgences that were so foreign to us at one point in time that we saw our parents do. Then we also see our parents over time as they get older, or depending on how much older they get, suffer some of the consequences of those very indulgences we thought were so great. I don't know about you, but I have seen more of those consequences happen in my life than I think a lot of people do. Not everybody. There's some people much worse, have much worse lives than I have. I'm thankful I'm not them. But I've seen, before I was 15, I had my mom's father, who I never really knew much because he was not really with us. He was in the military for the most part. He was divorced from my mom's mother. She wasn't a very good mother, unfortunately. She was my grandmother, and I loved her, but I learned the fact that my love for her was conditional on what I knew about her at the time, which was very little of the truth of what I knew about what happened to my mom. So my opinion sort of been changed because of that to some degree. But my grandfather I didn't really know much about. He was never really there a lot. He just come to visit, and that was in and out of my life. My great-parents on my mom's side I knew more about, ironically, than I knew of my grandfather because they lived in the city I was born in. So I got to meet them, and I also get to meet the parents of my dad. And the ironic thing is my parents and my dad were older people. Not much, but a little bit older because my dad being the youngest child and my mom being the second youngest child. And, of course, my mother's mother was not very old when she started, which my father's mother on the other side was an older woman who was late in life, in her 40s, late 40s, and had a child very late in life. She was the last one. And so, of course, different. Even though one was older, not by much, took about 3 or 4 years, and my father was, than my mom, or 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly. It was several years older. And the fact that he was the youngest, my sister, my mom, they're both the youngest child of their family, but very different circumstances of that happening. Anyway, so, like I said, I had a relationship with my grandparents on my dad's side. Not a very good one, but a relationship more so with my grandmother than my grandmother. That's another story. My great-grandparents I knew a little bit of because they were here. My grandmother come to visit from my mom's side. My grandfather would do the same. He eventually moved to Ontario. He was living in Ontario, lived in Toronto. I lived in Ottawa. So we didn't get to see him much. And then one summer of 1973 was a very, very momentous, and we didn't realize it would be a rather sad time in our lives at that time. A lot of things happened that year, along that time, or within the 10-year span of that time. Needless to say, the first thing that happened, especially in 1973 specifically, was my grandfather comes to visit with his new bride, a woman he had met and fell in love with and I guess knew at some point in time about his situation. We didn't know. He came down and spent a lot of time with us. He went and bought me a bed. He bought my brother Kevin. He didn't buy a bed from him, but he was supposed to because it was intending that he was going to come back again and give us both beds and eventually give my sisters beds. You know, something to pass down for the family, has something to remember. And he bought me a desk, which I had managed to convince him to buy me. I was the first grandchild he had. And of course, being the first grandchild, especially to a man who was fairly young himself when he had his family, he started to appreciate more, and we didn't realize how much more he was appreciating. And the reason I didn't realize how much more he appreciated was because I found it later, a little later after that, he was dying of cancer at age, I think it was 47. Yeah, 47 or 71. And he didn't have much time that he was dying of cancer. That was very, very common at that time. He worked in the Air Force, and because he worked in the Air Force, he was a mechanic. He was a kind of a strange situation there. He wanted to go into the Army during the war, but he was too young. He was 17 years old. His mom insisted that he not go. He wanted to go. He wanted to do something. I guess nobody knew how long the war was going to last, and frankly, at the time, never really predicted it was ending as soon as it did. And well, I was kind of glad that it did. At that time, he went in the service. He was insisting he wanted to go and serve his service. And his mom said, the only thing you can do, you can go into the reserves. And at that time, particularly, the reserves had several different places. One of the bases was on PEI, Summerside. And that's where the story of my life begins, pretty much, really, when it gets down to it. He met a woman in Summerside, PEI, or Ellerslie, somewhere around there, who became my grandmother. He did not know at the time that she was going to be a large part of his life. He just met her occasionally at the time, and she was meeting a lot of people. Meeting, that type of meeting. And he was there for a while and spent time with her off and on, and got involved with her. And he went back to Ontario and didn't think anything of it. And then one day, her siblings decided, because she happened to get pregnant and they knew she was pregnant by somebody, but they didn't know who. They suspected they knew who it could have been, but they didn't know who specifically. At least I don't think they ever knew. And they called up my grandfather and told him that he's going to be a grandfather. He's going to be a father, sorry. He's going to be a father. Come back, you need to do the right thing. So being a young man himself, he was only like 18, 19 years old when this all happened. About a couple years after, a year or so after this happened, the incident what caused this particular thing to happen, because he was 17. Then in the meantime, while he was in the PEI, he was training, the war ended. So he didn't get to go overseas, but he was still in the military. He was already signed for the military. And he stayed on and became aviation mechanic. And one of his duties was welding inside the wings of planes. At that time, they didn't know about safety and asbestos and the hazards of welding inside and having things like gas masks and protection for the people working in that particular field. And as a result, many years later, it turns out he ends up getting cancer. Ironically, we don't know if that's totally true, what happened, but it might have been a contributing factor because he also was a smoker at the time, which he eventually did quit. He quit many years before that. He was starting to recover, and then he finds out after the time of quitting, he quit both drinking and smoking, because part of the problem that started off his life, in his young life, was he got to indulge in alcohol, and this is how he came about meeting my grandmother, who was a big lush at the time, and that's she used to spend a lot of time at the Legion drinking and having fun and being the party girl, and that's how she died, pretty much having her basically way of things, and that's. She lived on her terms like a lady. She lived fairly old. I mean, I think she lived much longer than he did, but it was because she didn't get cancer, unfortunately. And she didn't weld planes. I mean, maybe that's part of it. She never really worked much, or I don't think she worked ever in her life for anything. Pretty much, I don't think she ever worked. I don't know if she ever worked that I know of. Anyway, so he came back to P after being told that he was now going to be a father. He did the right thing. He married my grandmother, adopted this young boy, who we later found out wasn't even his, ironically enough, many years later. But in the meantime, he was from a generation of being upstanding and honorable. He married her, and then a couple years later had my mom. So what ended up, now he has two children. One that he was his own biological child, he definitely knew was his, my mother. And this other child that he was told was his, that many years later he would find out it wasn't. And I had to say something about the man. He was very upstanding. Something that I hope to aspire to greatly, with the fact that I have a child of my own who is not mine. My fiance's son, Cece, or Cody. He likes to go by Cece. He's going through a bit of an identity crisis himself right now these days, understanding how to figure out where he belongs in the world and what, who he is and what his life is supposed to be and what his meaning is. And figure out where he belongs in this world and where he fits in. So I hope to be just as great an example of him for an ability he accepted. He helped him put him through college. He became a diesel mechanic, the boy. He worked on big diesel trucks. He just died recently, ironically enough. He was 78 years old. Died, I don't know if it was cancer or what he died of. And I didn't really know him much, but he seemed like a decent man. And I think that was partly, to some degree, due to my grandfather's influence and his inspiration and his attentiveness, which was ironic because he actually tended to him more than he actually tended to a mother who was his biological child, which is the ironic thing about this. Maybe because he was from a generation that men typically be the ones that you had to worry more about because they were the breadwinners of society for most of the time in the society, and women were best married off. What happened to my mom was still a teenager when she got married, so I think there wasn't much time to figure out because she was living with him eventually, briefly, when they lived in Ottawa for a while, and that's how this part of it comes about. Unfortunately, he didn't spend much time with her as he could have, because back then there was a bit of a prejudice against men raising children after the time they were separated. Because eventually, one time, the situation got worse and worse. He'd been overseas for a while. He was serving overseas. My mom was worth to stay in PEI with the mom, and because of her lifestyle never changing, she eventually lost custody of both her kids, and they were raised by my great grandmother on PEI, and he was sending money back to her until he came back home from overseas and doing duty. But unfortunately, like I say, he couldn't take custody of him, so eventually what he had to do in order to get around this is he had taken and had his mom become the custodial parent of both of them. I think it's just my mom. I think Gary by that time had already left home and went his week, being a couple years older than my mom. My mom was like 15, 16 years old, and she came to Ottawa to see her great grandparents and spend time with them, because the fact was they were able to have custody of him. Unfortunately, since he wasn't a male parent and wasn't a female parent, he wouldn't have been able to have custody until she reached the age of 16. At that time, he did take custody of her and was attempted to be the best father he possibly could be. Given the circumstances, he didn't really know how to be a dad. And he did what he thought was best for her to be who she was. And she eventually grew up, and before that, she met my dad. And being a very, very insecure self, like just coming from a small island, coming to a big city like Ottawa, had trouble making friends at first, and of course had trouble getting involved socially. She was very self-conscious, and she ended up with my dad through circumstances, ironically enough, that one of her friends was dating my dad's cousin, Dad's nephew, and this is what makes the story really, really interesting and really, really strange, is that since my dad was the youngest, and his oldest brother, who had been serving at war, by the way, which is ironic because he actually got to go to war, but her dad did not. Her dad didn't get to war because he was too young. So my grandfather was actually younger than my oldest uncle, was the oldest child of my dad's family. He went over, and by the time he came back from the war, the first thing he found was that his mom had a baby. So my mom was born about a year or so before the war ended, around the time that my mom's father was just over in PEI getting to be ready to go to war, which never happened. So it's a crazy, crazy circumstance. Anyway, so what happened was, since he came back from the war and had a child a couple years after the fact my father was born, about 2 or 3 years approximately, his first child, and that child was the one that happened to be dating one of my mom's friends. And because of that, the thing that then a lot of times, especially families, much like her mother, was the issue that she wouldn't want her daughter to go out alone without a chaperone, sometimes another date. So she went to arrange a double date, and at that time my mom was one of her friends. And because at the time the person that was supposed to come didn't show up, she needed another substitute. And it just so happened that my cousin, who was her boyfriend at the time, happened to know a guy, and the guy happened to be his uncle, who was only a couple years older than him, which is ironic. Anyway, so they ended up dating, and they kept going on, and my mom at that time had gained a little bit of weight because she had the fences to buy. Dad would just to give her sweet money, actually give her allowance money, because he just could, and he had a decent wage at that time. So she used to go to the bakery with her friends and used to eat lots of sweets. Now, what happened was my dad was a smoker, and smoking, like any other habit, he didn't have a lot of money, so he would bum money off her to buy cigarettes. So what happened was, as he bummed money off her to buy cigarettes, she had less money to spend on her sweets. So lo and behold, now she has a boyfriend who is taking money away from her because she wants to be liked by him, obviously. She's the first real relationship ever had. And because of that, the result is she loses a bunch of weight. And in the meantime, they get sexually active, and eventually they decide not to have protection one time, and that one time, of course, ta-da! I'm here. Thank you very much. And the ironic thing was, there was another boy that she was interested in, a friend that was going off to college at the time, or university, that she was interested in, but she had very, very insecure, and she was shy. She didn't want to ask her. And ironically, he shows interest in her because she had lost all this weight, and ironically enough, she had to turn him down because now she was carrying some extra baggage. Me. So, kind of a crazy, crazy story. So, leaving that aside, because that sort of sets up the guidelines for that, okay? And of course, they get married and have a family and that, and of course we all always come along. There's me, my brother Kevin, my sister Tammy, and my sister Sherry, the four of us, all born within a course of 8 years of each other. And the last one was that Sherry, the one I mentioned, wasn't actually existent yet. She just existed around the time my grandfather came in 1973. She was born in August, so that's why It must have been later than that. It must have been closer to October, because she was born on August 25th of 1973, and around that time, my grandfather had come down with his new bride to meet spend some time with us, and he made some tapes up and played with us and laughed, and I got my bed and other things transpired. Little did we know that he was actually very sick and dying, and he didn't have much time left, and this was just his way of trying to connect with us. To connect us one last time, he wanted to get to know his grandchildren. He wanted us to know him before he no longer was here. He never told us that he was dying, though, by the way. Didn't find that out till after he did die. And I had to attend the service. The man was 40, I think it was either 43 or 47 at the time. I can't remember exactly what year he was born in. But what happened before that, since Sherry was just born, he didn't get a chance to see Sherry, because I guess he must have came up around July, just before my mom was supposed to give birth. And then my mom gave birth after he went back, and then my mom, so it might have been June, July that we were original visit, because Mom was pregnant with Sherry at the time. I guess that would remember the context better. They wanted to see the new baby, so my mom, my dad, and my youngest sister Sherry went up. Not the rest of us. We were somebody had to watch us. I don't know who did, and she went up and he was able to see his granddaughter for the first time, and she doesn't have any recollection of this. She was too young to know her grandfather, the one he saw, and that would be the last time he'd get to see all of us alive, and that would be the last time I get to see him. Until we saw him buried. He was brought back to Ottawa, laid to rest in Cap Memorial Gardens in Ottawa here, which eventually would be the site of my dad's parents, both of them. Let's see, and a few other people I knew that died at that time. It was quite sad. Later on, my uncle Alfred, the man that was the father of the young man that went with my cousin, the woman that eventually would be my cousin, when they got married, a brief time when they were married. Now she's no longer married, but they're still my cousin. Her father-in-law, or next father-in-law now, his dad, would die of cancer himself. I don't know if whether it was from smoking or not, but he was only like 40, 50 years old himself. So I see a lot of tragedy from this particular disease and death. Maybe that was probably the reason why I never smoked or never wanted to smoke. You know, my dad was a 3-pack-a-day smoker, eventually got up to 3-pack-a-day smoker, and he used to drink excessive amounts of coffee with sugar or tea. There was mostly tea. So I had seen a lot of stuff in a very short period of time, living and death, a lot more than most people of that age should have to see. And worse still, the fact was it was bad enough I saw it, but my siblings, like I said, my youngest sibling was 8 years younger than me, had to witness most of the same stuff, and had to go through the same stuff as I did at a very much younger age than I did. So I don't know how that affected her overall in a relationship. Always, like I said, she didn't really get to know my grandfather, so she didn't really understand that. But as she saw other members of our family die, she became older and more aware of the stuff. She must have been affected to some degree about seeing all this death. And it's some of it very senseless and sad. As I grew older, same types of things happened. My mom's boyfriend, later in years, after my mom had split from my dad, he also died of cancer. But I didn't see that part coming. We didn't get to see the burst of it, because at that point in time, my mom moved to PEI with him many years later, after being with him and hoping for a good life. Went through several surgeries for lung cancer. Everything kind of thought was going to be okay. It turns out at the end, it wasn't that particular cancer that actually killed him. He actually had a tumor in his back that he had for years. He wondered why he was in pain all the time. He couldn't understand why he was in pain. And he suffered and was on morphine. And then he said to my mom, "I'm going to die. I'm going to have to leave you." And my mom said, "You know what? Everyone has to leave sometime. It's just, it's your turn." Sad, pathetic. So this is our ritual. This is life, the ritual of life. We start off as kids, we go to teenagers, we go to adults, we start young children with teenagers, adults, and then we die. But all that time through it all, we see a lot of stuff else happen in time. We see a lot of other things going on. And you don't realize how that colors us. It doesn't realize how that colors us as people. Don't realize how that colors us as a society, and how that changes us and how it makes up what we are and who we are and where we become and how we become who we are over time. Like I said, the prolific effect of death and young death in my family by people that I didn't really get to know sometimes, and some I knew a little bit more. And in fact, it reminds me of my own mortality. Like I said, I keep joking about the fact that I've outlived many people that are very famous people that you would think would have much larger lives than me. They had nothing. They had all this, had more money and resources than me. That should have lived much longer lives than I ever could. Didn't. Sometimes it was excesses of life itself, excesses of drugs, alcohol, obsesses just life in general, stress, stress of fame, the requirements of fame. Maybe that's one thing I'm glad about me. I'm not famous yet. Maybe I'll never be famous. Maybe I'll never ever be able to experience the type of fame that these people experience. We'll never be able to experience anything like that. But there's life is full of all these types of things. We have to learn to cope with them. And I guess what happens is when you become very famous, you don't always get to learn how to cope with these types of things that most of us have to go through. And that sometimes leads to us not having the lives that we deserve. We live long or we live short. Sometimes it's like to say the light, not Hydra, but sorry, Blade Runner. I said the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. Is that a truism? Maybe it is. Getting back to say, I know that the story tends to scatter over it a little bit. It tends to fragment a little bit, as does my attention span sometimes. This may not be the linear story that most people expect people to tell about their lives and why they are where they are, and what they are today, and where they are at the place they're at right now. But this is my story. At least a part of my story. My story is much bigger than this. All of our stories are. All of us have stories. All of us have interesting stories, and some of us have sometimes very boring stories. We have sometimes very, very boring things happen. Sometimes we wish and hope for a boring story where we can live a very ordinary, normal life. And then some of us have an overly exciting life and wish that we had a less exciting life. How much some of us also have a boring life and there's a more exciting life. And sometimes the old saying goes, you be careful what you wish for, you may just get it. So, like I said, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I hope to live a long life. Lately, I've been feeling more rigorous on getting back to my point of and changes. I realized that I need to be more in charge of me and getting back to the thing about choices. Just because you can choose to do something doesn't mean you should do it. Ability to do something does not automatically justify its action. It means that now you have the agency to decide, whereas before you didn't. When you grow up, you're told a lot of things are wrong. You're not explained why. You're just told they are, and you have to take it as gospel, as most people say. Some of us do, some of us don't. Some will go and defy the acts purposely because we want to find exactly what it is that's so bad about these things. How many kids, when their parents said, don't touch the stove, would touch the stove anyway, only to find out that there was a reason why their parents were attempting to tell them that. Our parents, most times, are attempting to save us from the pain, suffering, and anguish of the bad choices that they have made themselves in the past. They want to help and give us knowledge, but unfortunately sometimes we think what they're doing is actually preventing us from experiencing life. That there's something they're not telling us that we'll be missing out on, that we won't get if we don't participate in this activity. We don't do this thing, we're not going to find out exactly what it is. And sometimes we just need to know so badly, we do it anyway. And then once we figure it out, go, oh, man, I understand why they told us. Why didn't they explain what the reason was? Isn't that ironic? We are taught by our parents to not do things. At the same time, our parents don't always think we're smart enough to understand why. Some of us aren't. But at least give us the opportunity to find out if we are or not, instead of assuming that. That's my biggest sort of regret in my life, is that the fact there's many members of my family told me things not to do without any context. They just told me don't do it, and they had their reasons. And out of curiosity, being humans, we're curious. We want to find out what's what. We want to understand why things are the way they are. we'll do things like that because we want to find out these things, even if it means finding out that the lesson that was to be learned was a lesson we could have avoided learning. At least learning in the way that we ended up learning it. So now I'm older, and now we got choices. For me, it's choice of eating things differently and treating my life differently and being more respectful of my existence as it's getting closer and closer to the end. The fact is, it doesn't have to end the way my parents did. It doesn't have to the way my dad did. It doesn't have to the way my grandfather did. It doesn't have to be like a lot of people's lives ended. Unless you want to. If you really want to end, there's all kinds of ways you can get it in. Simply put, that you don't have to go through all this anguish and get it over with because you're so thinking, convinced that life is so horrible that ending it now will be better than enduring it any further. For those people that feel that way, I feel really sorry for you because the gift of life is just that, a gift. You get it. You don't ask for it. You get it anyway. And then you live it for better or worse. And once you get out to a certain part of that life, you're no longer being tethered by anything other than your own choices, your own bad influences, and your own perception of what's going on in life. And those are the only things that are stopping you or preventing you or enabling you to do the things you really want to do in life. Whether they're good or bad. Doesn't matter. The ultimate thing is the consequence of your actions. Most of us don't understand the consequences of our action until the actions happen. Until we actually get to experience the consequences. And then we have to go through and figure out what to do now. When sometimes all we would have done, it would have made it much better if we would have avoided having to deal with those consequences in the first place. So, having done that through my life, having to experience consequences of things that happened to me that I wish never happened, that have happened, and having to still live my life and still make the best of my life, I need to make better choices so I can be the best person I possibly be. And I hope that you out there learn a little bit from me, from my stories of things, and not make some of the same mistakes I made, and maybe learn to be a better people to not just yourself, but to the little people around you, your friends and family. I mean, this network of people, social network of people, is probably the most important network most people have in terms of socialization, is your friends and family. And the larger that scope is, the bigger the scope is, the more broad you can make that, the better. In terms of people that are truly your friends and your family, you can't really choose what your family is. You can choose who to associate in your family, but you can't choose your family itself. Your family is your family. But your friends and all the other people around you besides that are your choice to be involved with and their choice to be involved with you. Simple as that. So having said that, like I say, I'm going to start getting back to more regular podcasts. I keep saying this. And say this over again, but you know what? I need to mean it. And the reason I know I mean it, or at least have a better chance of meaning it, is because I'm feeling more energized than I've ever felt. I'm still recovering from the bad habits of my excesses, the things I learned, the bad habits I learned as a child and as a child, the indulgences that we all get presented with and seduced with every single day of the week. All those things that we think are part of the ritual being grumps. And we find out very, very quickly that some of these choices are really not as good as we thought they were. They're not as really as good as they sound like they are. That were sold. You ever say the phrase, not as advertised? Well, this applies to most things in life that we think are good, because there's people out there that have a vested interest in making us do things that are not necessarily good for us, that seem to feel like they're good for us. And that goes for everything in life. So, anyway, this is like the broadcast. This is my podcast for this week. It's March, I think it's 9th today. And, May 9th, sorry. I don't even know what month I am. That's terrible. May 9th. Hope to post this up tonight or tomorrow, so it might not be posted today. It might be posted sometime tomorrow. We'll see. See how things go. Maybe we'll be able to do that. I can probably do it sometime this afternoon, post it up. And as always, I want you to get involved. Like, comment, subscribe, and recommend it to other people. Recommend this podcast to other people. I want to build an audience. If you think I'm saying is worthwhile and meaningful, something that people could benefit from, and maybe contribute to in some sort of way financially, maybe not necessarily financially, but just in comment-wise, and just give me some input and some feedback about what I can do in terms of topics and what things I can discuss, that might be more meaningful. Or things you want to know about me that may be things I might be able to tell you about myself. Like, comment, and subscribe in the comments. You can email at my inbox at info@endtimemedia.ca. That's info@intimemedia.ca. I'm hoping to start checking that email regular basis to see if any of you decide to comment directly to me through the channel. Our website is www.intimemedia.ca or untimegroup.ca, www.intimegroup.ca, or itmcg.ca. I have 3 different links now just to make it easier for you because I care. And we're in the process of doing some modification of the website, and we're going to hopefully soon be posting some of our products we're going to have mostly around the work with my brother Kevin Tizik, local artist. Some people might know him as the gentleman behind Sweet Home Chicago, along with his partner Doug Comrie. And San Brother Mass Memphis Mafia was a project involved. He's also working on some stuff right now. He's sort of back into the sidelines and getting prepared to do some studio recordings of his own work. He's trying to look at original art and original music he wants to perform. And I'm hoping he'll be back soon performing live somewhere because it was a great show. And I think the two of them together, I think even if we get Kevin and Doug doing some sort of revival in Chicago and maybe some new project, hopefully we'll see. We'll have to see what happens because Doug's a very fickle guy, and but he's very fun and entertaining, and he's good at what he does. He's a great entertainer. It's a great performance, and I hope that maybe they come back at least as that looks maybe once or twice before, so people that haven't seen the show can get to see them. For those that haven't seen the show, check out my channel, Sweet Home Chicago, on YouTube, where I post a lot of the videos that I tape from the shows themselves, and you can check out and see exactly what a good show with them would be like if you were part of the audience out there and enjoying the beautiful, sweet music of one of the finer Blues Brothers tribute bands that exist in my mind, at least exist in Canada for the most part. I think they've done a really good service to making sure they represent the tribute of the Blues Brothers and of John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, and played proper homage to the music of the blues and the music of the Blues Brothers themselves. So anyway, like I said, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Check out my channels. There's like I said, I'm also on Rumble. If you want to check me out at my2loonies.com. I'm hoping to expand to some other platforms. I'm also hoping to expand this podcast to a more detailed podcast where I can talk into some other things a little bit more controversial. That obviously now what's going to happen with YouTube is YouTube is going to start getting censors, especially with the new C11 bill that was passed recently. And I'm hoping that that doesn't affect the Canadian content and things like my channel and other channels, probably larger channels than myself. But who knows? We'll have to see exactly how this particular bill gets implemented through the government and the CRTC, and how they decide to try and define Canadian content about what's really Canadian. I don't know what the hell Canadian content really is. Do you? Does anybody really know content? Is content in Canada the Beachcombers? Is it Heartland, or shows only produced by the CBC? Or is it other things that come out of Canada, just like the music of Canada? We've got some great music in Canada that's been accepted all worldwide, much like some of our other content. So the fact is, Canadian content is actually world content. I mean, just because it maybe have a Canadian flavor, what you should say is not Canadian content, it's content with a Canadian flavor. So that we have some representation of Canada in the content, but the themes are, the cultural themes are relevant to any place, anywhere. They're not exclusively Canadian themes or world themes. That's the type of thing I think as a Canadian that we much better focus on, not just make him a Canadian and say, oh, this is a Canadian thing, that's Canadian content. What is Canadian? We got so many different races of people in this country that represent so many different groups of different ethnicities. We are not really can be homogenized to one specific type of people. So what would be Canadian content? A Chinese Canadian person's content that represents stuff that's from his home country, is that considered Canadian content? Think about it. Is it considered Canadian content for a Chinese person that's in Canada who is born here, second generation Chinese Canadian or third generation or Ukrainian or whatever race, making content in their own ethnic culture in Canada? Is it considered Canadian content, or is it considered content of the country? What defines Canadian content? What really defines it? Is it English content from basically the people most of the Anglophone? Is it French content from people in Quebec? What defines Canadian culture? I like the government to explain this to me, because quite frankly, I don't even think they know. But what I do know is I think the Canadian content more represents the fact of ideas that are represented, that are currently popular in the current establishment of the Canadian government running today, and that's what they consider Canadian. So I think that's the real purpose of this type of bill, is to censor the type of content that may or may not be offensive to somebody out there. And let's face it, something's always going to be offensive to someone, no matter what it is, no matter who's talking at what time. And I think that's the slippery slope that I think that Canada does not need to go on. I'm hoping for this platform to be a free and honest exchange. I want to talk to people who are conservatives. I want to talk to people who are liberal. I want to talk to people who are libertarian. I don't care what you belong to. Talk to me. I'm not afraid of talking to you. I'm not afraid of talking with you. I'm not afraid of talking with anyone. No matter what the ideas you have, whether they're against or for what I believe, in any way, shape, or form, I don't care. I'll talk to you. Because the things, and as long as you talk to me and respect me, I'll respect you. And at least that's how dialogue happens. Dialogue doesn't happen when one group countering itself in the corner saying, oh, I will not talk to anyone else, and I can't talk to anybody else, like of the members of the Liberal Party and Trudeau and his entourage. Not wanting to talk to anyone that's not represented ideas that are popular by him, that are against what he believes and his own echo chamber, not recognizing that Canada is still democracy, and part of that democracy means that we have to have the same voices talk, and the fact is not all the time that he's right and not all the times we're right. The fact is sometimes we have to come to a compromise and find out how we can live together and respect each other still, and not feel like one side is taking over and usurping the other totally, and then we're being capitulated to being reduced to not being free to do what we do and live that we live. Otherwise, we're living in a place like communist China. And quite frankly, I do not want to live in a place like China, but it's starting to become more and more like that every day. And I think people should be upset about that. Not necessarily upset with the Liberal Party in general, but upset with ideas that represent the opposite of what Canada as a nation was founded on, and the values of most North American democracies and most European democracies. Those ideas should be defended in vanguard no matter which party is in power at any time, not at the expense of other people or the expense of other people's ideas. That's the type of thing that happens in totalitarian nations. That's what happens in Russia. That's what happens in China, when one ideas are promoted and other ideas are suppressed at the expense of making sure that's the only way they can feel. If your ideas are that weak, that you have to suppress other people's ideas to make your ideas stand up, then maybe you should rethink your ideas. Come on, really. That's the bottom line. If your ideas are that weak, then please, then you obviously got a problem you need to deal with. So these are the type of discussions I want to. Right now, I'm just talking to Mike about my life and mentioning things just to fill time. But I want to have something more meaningful to talk about other than that. So please, like I said, anyone who sees this, recommend to your friends. I'm ready to discuss anything about anything. Like, comment, subscribe, or just like I said, email if you got something to ask me at info@endtimemedia.ca, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you and write back to you or have a discussion online. Or you can have if you want to come on the channel and actually go through Skype or some other meeting, talk to me on the channel. I would love it. I would love to be able to open this channel up to be able to that, and maybe expand the format a little bit to conclude. So anyway, I'm going to run down here because I'm almost in 45 minutes, and it's the longest podcast I've done because I've obviously had to go through a lot of things. I have a lot of passion about this thing, and I want to be more involved in it. I want to make this my life's mission, my sort of residential for living now, to be able to get to as many people and talk to as many people as possible, thinking about thought-provoking ideas, talking about my experiences about life, relating to you and getting to know everybody, get to know who everyone is, their experiences, so I can have an understanding of everyone's point of view. So anyway, like I said, I'm Mike, and this is my two Loonies work for this week, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.